Now there's a few quirks in the way that we're wired. For example, phantom limb pain. That's when a person who has lost, for example, their leg, feels a ghost presence of the leg that's not there. In fact, if the tips of the nerves where they got severed are irritated, you'll continuously feel pain in a leg that's not there. So it's a good example of how we are the homunculus, how we are our brains. Another quirk in the way we're wired is when your arm hurts while you're having a heart attack. The muscles under your skin are symmetric. The nerves going to your skin and the underlying muscle are also symmetric. However, the organs inside your body are wired in a lopsided way. And the reason for this is during development from an embryo, originally our organs, your intestines, your cardiovascular system were simple, mere symmetric tubes running down the middle of the body. And as the fetus develops, these structures start wrapping and folding and getting all lopsided, and consequently it creates a short-circuiting of the nerve system. In this example of arm pain during a heart attack, the nerve from your arm converges with the nerve from your heart, and then a common single nerve makes its way up your body to your brain, such that when it's actually your heart that's hurting, from your brain's point of view, it's your arm as well. Now, you can't fault your brain for being fooled. Imagine if there's two streets. One's called Arm Road, and the other one's called Heart Road. And these two smaller roads fuse into a single main highway. And you're standing way up the main highway, and cars are coming at you. In this analogy, the electrical impulse from the pain signal from a heart attack, you wouldn't be able to tell from which of these two roads the cars originated from. Now, so far I've described nerves like wires, one long continuous strand. Your brain is a clump of these such wires, and from the distance they do look like continuous strands, but on closer inspection a given nerve is more like a train comprised of repeating segments. Now, for the electricity to travel from one segment to one segment, the electricity has to jump the gap, and it does that by liberating a chemical called a neurotransmitter at the junction between nerves, which floats across the gap and continues the electricity onward. One such neurotransmitter is serotonin. Serotonin is affected by weather. In Israel, there's a time of year called Sharav, which is a ill wind that blows. And what's going on with that is the air separates with this particular kind of wind into cations, which are positively charged particles, exclusively away from any anions, negatively charged particles. The effect it has on the people is it raises their brain serotonin levels, and they become irritable and strained. In the United States, they call this serotonin irritation syndrome. This process can be offset by what's called an anion generator, which blows out negatively charged particles to compensate for the cation's influence on raising the brain serotonin level. Hospitals have actually used these instruments mounted on the ceilings of the hallway. Now, pain itself can be viewed as a design error. The purpose of pain is to inform us when we're in some form of danger. For example, when your hand gets too close to the flame on the stove. However, pain itself can become the problem. The brain has no pain fibers, no ability to feel pain. The exception is the lining of the blood vessels, which is what's going on with migraines, and the outer lining of the brain, but not the brain itself. In fact, you can peel back someone's skull and probe the brain and create a map of what's going on while the patient is still awake to report on his experiences. So, for example, you move the electrode towards a certain section of the brain, say the sensory strip at the bottom where the foot is, and the person will say that they feel some sensation from their foot, or conversely, corresponding part of the adjacent motor strip, their foot flies through the air when it's stimulated, and that's the motor section for the foot part of your body. And you can map out every sensation and every motor skill, what part of the body and what causes it to move by this process. The way pain itself works is pain elicits chemical mediators of pain called prostaglandins. Medicines like anti-inflammatories and aspirin are used to affect these prostaglandins. Have you ever noticed when you take aspirin for a headache early on, it seems to do something, but if you wait too late, it doesn't seem to do anything? The reason for that is aspirin suppresses the enzyme that's involved in the production of prostaglandins, but doesn't decrease the existing prostaglandins already been produced. So early on it'll make a difference, and later on it's too late. Those prostaglandins are already floating around. Incidentally, the word aspirin is an acronym. It's A for its chemical name, acetylsalicylic acid, SPIR, derived from the plant that's used to manufacture aspirin, called Spiraea, followed by IN, which was a suffix they used at the turn of the century to identify chemical compounds as medicinal, another example being penicillin. Anyhow, back to our wiring. Some people are wired differently from birth. An example is synesthesia, which means a coming together of the senses. The affected folks with this describe feeling flavors. A different patient may instead taste shapes. The most common variant is colored hearing. A noise, for example, that is a low bass may be perceived as the color blue, or at the other extreme, a shrill noise as red. Now, this is not a newly discovered derangement. In fact, Darwin's cousin wrote on the subject. The disorder runs in families, is more common in females, and further who are left-handed. Now, the areas of the brain are specialized, as mentioned prior. For example, smell is in one part and vision is in another. In the middle is the temporal lobe, a sort of intersection. For example, the smell of a rose and the way it looks meet at the temporal lobe, and then the signal advances forward to the frontal lobe where the concept of a rose is formed. So what's going on with synesthesia is that these pathways are short-circuited and wired wrong. The fact that the drug LSD can induce synesthesia in normal people suggests that we all have the structural capacity to experience this syndrome. You might think of synesthesia as an asset, a sixth sense, which is derived from a combination of the other five. Imagine you're practicing playing the piano and you look down at the key and you listen to a string of notes that you're playing, but consider if additionally the keys were colored or numbered. Remembering this string of notes would be easier. For example, you hear CCF as you play it on the piano, and you see blue, blue, green. It would give you one more way to remember the music. Now there's a theme in the brain as a whole called attenuation or acclimation. It means that if something is constant, attention to it goes on the back shelf, and it's changed, it's prioritized, it's what you notice. It's the reason that the turning signals on a car blink, because if they were just to stay in one constant red, you would notice it as well. Imagine if you're in a room listening to some peaceful music and a bird flies into the room. When that happens, you cease hearing the music. Not that you can't actually hear it, but you don't notice it. Now there's some interesting examples of when attenuation and its wiring go wrong. There's a thing called word alienation. It's an example, and it's not a disease that you either have or don't have. It's something that happens to all of us. It occurs when you're reading the same word over and over, and the effect is that the word starts to become foreign, unfamiliar. It just looks weird. So, for example, you look at the word is, and you notice all the is's on the page, or you repeat it in your mind, is. It'll actually start to seem weird. You can do this yourself. Akin to this is something called jamais vu. It's the opposite of déjà vu. People know déjà vu. You have no reason to recognize something, and you seem to. Jamais vu is the opposite. You should know what you're looking at, but it seems strange and foreign, much like word alienation. It's a more extreme version of that. For example, one day for no reason you look out the window of your own house, and what you see looks unfamiliar for just a moment. Now, there is a disease involving jamais vu where it's a type of seizure where you get that intensely and completely and suddenly in the seizure attack, and it's the only symptom that you have. You're otherwise completely oriented and physically well, but you have this incredible jamais vu experience. Speaking of seizures, There is one colorful one where the only symptom is orgasm. Can you imagine? I bet you those folks aren't very big on taking their medication.